Now, with the eagle vision being covered, we can now move on to the 4th Ezra author's view of the Son of Man in chapter 13. The outline here shows that the focus is all on this messianic delivery, and Daniel 7 again is clearly the backdrop to this vision, just like chapter 12 was with the fourth beast. 3 segments of the chapter don't offer any details on the 4th Ezra author's eschatology or on the Messiah, so we won't cover them. We will cover each of these sections along with the description of the lost tribes that will discuss the northern 10 tribes that were deported by the Assyrians in 722 BC. So let's start unpacking this chapter, verses 1 through 13. And it came to pass, after 7 days, I dreamed a dream by night. And lo, there arose a wind from the sea, that it moved all the waves thereof. And I beheld, and lo, that man waxed strong with the thousands of heaven. And when he turned his countenance to look, all the things trembled that were seen under him. And whensoever the voice went out of his mouth, all they burned that heard his voice, like as the earth faileth when it fleeth the fire. And after this I beheld, and lo, there was gathered together a multitude of men, out of number, from the 4 winds of the heaven, to subdue the man that came out of the sea. But I beheld, and lo, he had graved himself a great mountain, and flew upon it. But I would have seen the region or place whereout the hill was graven, and I could not. And after this I beheld, and lo, all they which were gathered together to subdue the man were so afraid, and yet durst did fight him. And lo, as the man saw the violence of the multitude that came, he neither lifted up his hand, nor held a sword, nor any instrument of war. But only I saw that he sent out of his mouth as it had been a blast of fire, and out of his lips a flaming breath, and out of his tongue he cast out sparks and tempests. And they were all mixed together, the blast of fire, the flaming breath, and the greatest tempest, and a fell with violence upon the multitude, which was prepared to fight, and burned them up every one, so that upon a sudden of an innumerable multitude nothing was to be perceived, but only dust and smell of smoke. When I saw this, I was afraid. Afterward saw I the same man came down from the mountain, and call unto him another peaceable multitude. And there came much people unto him, whereof some were glad, some were sorry, and some of them were bound, and other some were brought of them that were offered. So, verse 1 reflects Daniel 7, 1 through 2, with them both having a dream vision at nighttime. 13:2 continues to follow Daniel 7:2 with the wind moving the waves on the sea. And since chapter 12 was mainly about the fourth beast, is that it makes sense that the 4th Ezra author is going to do a deep dive on the Son of Man figure, beginning in verse 3, saying that the man came with the thousands of heaven. This obviously is referring to an angelic host accompanying the man. What's interesting is that the thousands language is tied with the Ancient of Days in Daniel 7:10. In the New Testament, Revelation 19:4 has the Son of Man coming with the armies of heaven. 13:4 is a big linking verse for us. We see the man's voice being focused on, and his voice is enough to cause the eagle kingdom to burn. The burning language is from Daniel 7:11 of the fourth beast. The interpreting verse of Daniel 7:26 is interesting, as who is the they is debated. I would say is that the Son of Man figure in the Ancient of Days, or it's the Son of Man with the angelic army. It's likely the latter, as they are the ones who will have direct combat with those on earth. As said, the man's voice is big, as 1137's Lion Messiah, who was described sending out a man's voice under the eagle. Now, is the Messiah literally a lion, or is he a man? Obviously a man. And the clear connection occurs here between chapter 11 through 12's Messiah and 13's Son of Man. The interpreting verse of 1137 was 1231, where the speaking is again highlighted to show the authority of the Messiah over the earth. All of these are tied to the man's voice language from Daniel 8's and 10 through 12's man on the rivers. The fire description is found in Daniel 7's descriptions of the glorious man, along with, Daniel 10's 7 descriptions, there's 7 of them, of the glorious man, along with the voice language, again, which 13:4 used as well. Folks, the descriptions perfectly align between Daniel and 4th Ezra, meaning that both are clearly speaking about one Messiah, not two. What I hope you realize is that you're not going to get this type of exposition from rabbis, Charles Torrey, or other critical scholars, because it clearly shows that chapter 13 continues on from chapters 11 and 12. That means that the Lion Messiah is therefore the Son of Man figure, which means he's the Messiah described dying in chapter 7. Now, verse 13:5 talks about the whole earth gathering together to subdue the man from the four winds of the heaven. This reference is pointing to the four cardinal directions, like in Daniel 8 and 11, where Daniel 7:2 was more likely talking about heavenly beings. That idea can be seen in both Zechariah 6:5 and Revelation 7:1. But in response to this earthly alliance, the man from the sea, in verse 6, carves out a great mountain and flies on it. This is obviously pulling from Daniel 2's uncut stone, that is the great mountain, that the man is apparently flying upon instead of the clouds. All the writer is doing is merging the ideas together by substituting in one for the other. Now, if you're not that acquainted with the cloud writing language, is that in the Old Testament, this comes up a lot, with Psalm 68 being extremely clear, that it is Yahweh who rides upon the clouds. In fact, there's 10 Old Testament examples that all say that it is God who comes riding on the clouds. The only exception to this in the Old Testament is Daniel 7:13, that said that it is the Son of Man who comes riding on the clouds. So, instead of thinking that the Son of Man is getting to borrow Dad's car this one time, is that we are witnessing one of the primest examples in the Old Testament of divine plurality, with two characters both requiring the reader to recognize each as Yahweh. But since the Old Testament is abundantly clear that there is only one God, that both the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man are the one Yahweh, having the same essence, but are still distinct from one another in their personhood. But Jews aren't Trinitarians. Not Pharisaic ones after the 1st century. The book Two Powers in Heaven, Early Rabbinic Reports About Christianity and Gnosticism by Alan Segal, is the book that I would recommend you looking into. Right out of the gate, he states that the results showed that the earliest heretics believed in two complementary powers in heaven. This statement can help you if you're trying to rebut someone who says that Constantine made the whole, Trinitarian idea up at the Council of Nicaea and adopt some pagan godhead idea. Typically you'll hear that from Unitarians, Jehovah's Witnesses when they come knocking at your door, and probably rabbinic Jews as well. Segal goes on saying, the extra rabbinic evidence allowed the conclusion that the traditions were earlier than the first century. Simply put, Segal openly acknowledges that Jews believed in a Godhead prior to Jesus' time. And the second book that I recommend is The Bodies of God in the World of Ancient Israel by Benjamin Sommer. He states, no Jew sensitive to Judaism's own classical sources, meaning ancient ones, however, can fault the theological model Christianity employs when it avows belief in a God who has an earthly body as well as a Holy Spirit and a heavenly manifestation. What he is speaking about here is a triune God. He continues saying, for that model we have seen is a perfectly Jewish one. So, Jesus referred to himself as the cloud rider who sits at the right hand of the Father to the Sanhedrin at his trial. They, the Sanhedrin at that time, knew exactly what he meant in that he was equating himself with God. In their eyes, this blasphemous statement, sorry about that, allowed them to order the death sentence, and later the same to Stephen in Acts 7 when he said the same. Later in the rabbinic period, you still have rabbis commenting on the Son of Man and consistently saying that he is the King Messiah. Rashi is one of the most famous rabbis, said exactly this in his Daniel commentary. In the Zohar, you have it as well. Here's another example of it. And famous Rabbi Nachmanides, or aka Ramban, who is best known in Christian circles for his debate with the Dominican friar Pablo Cristiani, a convert who from Judaism to Christianity, he connects the Messiah with the Son of Man, but also the star out of Jacob language in Numbers 24:7. And his comments on Genesis 2 is that he connects the Son of Man with the Son of David. So the New Testament isn't making things up, folks, when it applies all of these titles to Jesus. What's interesting is that during Ramban's famous debate at Barcelona, Pablo Cristiani raises the topic of the slain Messiah from Isaiah 52 through 53. And here's Ramban's reply. It is true that our teachers, may their memory be a blessing, in the Agagite books, interpret the passage allegorically of the Messiah. But they never said that the Messiah would be slain by the hand of his enemies. You will never find in any of the books of the literature of Israel, either in the Talmud or the Agagite books, that the Messiah, son of David, would ever be slain. Did you see what he did there? It was a nice lawyer dodge by Ramban because he knew that the dying Messiah existed in rabbinic teachings, but as Messiah ben Joseph. So he slipped in the son of David comment ever carefully. Even the translator, Maccabee, saw this and said Ramban was careful to add the son of David language in order to distinguish him from Messiah ben Joseph. Now, back to 4th Ezra 13:6, is that he knows that the uncut stone is God's kingdom that will consume all earthly kingdoms and not be left to others, i.e., Gentiles. So we can take our chart and safely add Daniel 2 in and show the horizontal alignment of the great mountain and the Son of Man for the 4th Ezra author. Now, verses 7 through 11 can quickly be summarized together. 7 has Ezra wondering where the mountain was carved. We'll see that in just a little bit. Verse 8 says, even though the evil multitude were afraid of the divine man, they still went and fought against him. 9 through 11 says that the Son of Man didn't use any man-made weaponry, but had the ability to consume the evil army with the power of his fiery breath. Again, it's a clear alignment between Daniel 7:11 and 26 consuming, fiery language of the 4th kingdom. Verse 12 says, the Son of Man came down the mountain and called unto himself a peaceable multitude. This mirrors Daniel 7:18, where the saints receive the kingdom after the Son of Man conquers the 4th kingdom. 13a is interesting as it talks a lot about of other people coming unto the Son of Man. These people have some that were glad, some that were sorry, some bound like captives, and others that were offered. That will get unpacked later, but its roots is very likely Daniel 7:14b and 27, talking about how all the people, nations, and languages will serve the Son of Man. Needless to say, the Son of Man from Daniel 7 is viewed as the Messiah to the Jewish 4th Ezra author. Now we get the angelic interpretation of the Son of Man from the sea, verses 23 through 38. This is the meaning of the vision. Whereas thou sawest a man coming up from the midst of the sea. The same is he whom God the highest has kept a great season, by which his own self shall deliver his creature, and he shall order them that are left behind. And whereas thou sawest that out of his mouth there came a blast of wind and fire and storm, and that he held neither sword nor any instrument of war, but that the rushing in of him destroyed the whole multitude that came to subdue him, this is the interpretation. Behold, the days will come when the Most High will begin to deliver them that are upon the earth, and he shall come to the astonishment of them that dwell on the earth. And one shall undertake to fight against another, one city against another, one place against another, one people against another, and one realm against another. And the time shall be when these things shall come to pass, and the signs shall happen that which I showed thee before, and then shall my Son be declared, whom thou sawest as a man ascending. And when all the people heard his voice, every man shall in their own land leave the battle they have one against another, and an innumerable multitude shall be gathered together, as you saw them, willing to come and to overcome him by fighting. But he shall stand upon the top of Mount Zion, and Zion shall come, and shall be showed to all men, being prepared and builded, like as you saw the hill graven without hands. And this is my Son shall rebuke the wicked inventions of those nations, which for their wicked life are fallen into the tempest. And shall they lay before them their evil thoughts, and the torments wherewith they shall begin to be tormented, which are like unto a flame, and he shall destroy them without labor by the law which is like unto me. So, the interpretation starts in verse 25 with the man coming up from the midst of the sea. Verse 26 should sound familiar as the exact language of 12, 32, and 34. So, a critic trying to say that 12 and 13 have two different messiahs like Tory is again extremely weak. So, if 12's Messiah equals 13's Messiah, and 12's equals 7's, therefore 7 equals 13's. Folks, it's just the transitive property at its simplest form. Thus, our horizontal alignment can incorporate 13's divine man. Verses 27 through 28 reiterates verses 9 through 11 with the divine man destroying the multitude with his mouth. Verses 29 and 30 describes his arrival. Verse 29's opening clause of "Behold, the days come" is another linking phrase to chapter 12, as we see it in 12:13 describing the rise of the eagle kingdom. This phrase is also in 5:11 and 6:18. These two are from the first and second visions, and also part of the fifth and sixth visions. So, does it make more sense that the author was envisioning one single event or two different ones? I think you know that it's one. So, it's another clear connector of 7, 12, and 13. But the third vision didn't have that. True. But in 5:1 and 6:18, we see God visiting them that dwell upon the earth. And that visiting language is in 9:2, that is part of the third vision of the dying Messiah. 6:18 continues with God judging the world, and the big phrase for us is verse 20 with "the books shall be open," as that is clearly coming from Daniel 7:10. Guys, all of this Daniel 7 language clearly points to the same event from the author's perspective, with the Son of Man coming at the astonishment of them that dwell on the earth. Now, verse 31, I suspect, perked your attention, as the language is very similar to Jesus' nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom statement in the Olivet Discourse. The reminder is that it's here that Jesus mentions the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet. So, we see a similarity between these. And the reason why is, one, is because that it's a Jewish phrase used in a few pre-New Testament texts. In Qumran, you have Jubilees 11:2 talking about the post-flood world when the kingdoms were forming and beginning to go to war with one another. In the Old Testament, you have 2 Chronicles 15:6 using the line where they're all rooted from is Isaiah 19:2. What's really interesting here about 19:2 is that in the prior verse, it describes Yahweh riding on the clouds, coming in judgment. Again, this is why the Son of Man is viewed as Yahweh. He just wasn't borrowing Dad's car, cloud car. And why we know Jesus saw himself as Yahweh. Every self-reference to the Son of Man, Jesus is calling himself God. In the next next in verse 32 is that I assume this was another eyebrow raiser with the God's Son language, who is defined as the man ascending from the midst of the sea. This Son language occurs again in verse 37 and 52. Now, because the text is clearly equating the Son of Man with the Son of God, is that text critics come barking into the wind because this sounds too Christian to them. The reason that is because the New Testament was written by Second Temple Jews, just like the fourth Ezra author was. But critics aren't going to accept that because that's such a position. So we have to defend ourselves always at all times, and by showing that the data, though, does support this view by looking at all the variant translations and the manuscript data. English translators overwhelmingly go with Son. Stone is the lone one here. When you look at the manuscript evidence, is that you see the Latin and Syriac are consistent with Son. Servant is only used in the Aramaic manuscript. Stone has to create a narrative as to why the later dated Aramaic manuscript are likely more representative of the original, while the much earlier Latin and Syriac manuscripts are not. Why the Son language wins the day for most scholars, and including myself, is that chapter 14:9 is another place where the Son language is attested overwhelmingly. Regardless, Stone sticks with servant, even though you can see that the Aramaic manuscripts come 12 to 1400 years after the Latin version. The Son language occurs in 728, and we will discuss it there too. Yes, we can accept that the word Jesus was inserted in by the Latin translators, but that's not a reason to throw out Son in all of those verses. The concept of the Messianic Son of God is pre-Christian, as 1 Enoch 105:2 has the my son language. So the fourth Ezra author and the New Testament aren't alone with using the Son language. But the biggest reason for accepting the Son language as original is that all of them are rooted in Psalm 2, with the Mashiach king from verses 1 through 6 is directly called God's begotten Son. Even the rabbis teach this in the Talmud. Genesis Rabbah 44:8 says that it's about the King Messiah, and the famous Maimonides said that this is about the Messiah too. Psalm 2 gets connected to the Son of David from 2 Samuel 7:16, which then gets connected with Numbers 24:17 and Genesis 49:10 because of the royal scepter and rod language in both of them. Daniel's Son of Man perfectly parallels Psalm 2's Son of God, as both are given a kingdom by the Father and will rule the Gentile nations by inheriting them from God, and we, the nations, will serve the Son of Man / Son of God figure. We are obviously talking about one and the same person here, and is how / why the fourth Ezra writer used the Son of God language in verse 32 with the Son of Man. Verse 33 picks back up with the people of the earth at war with each other, but then collectively join together in their attempt to overtake the Son of Man. Verses 35 through 36 say that the Son of Man stands upon Mount Zion and qualifies that Mount Zion is the mountain cut without hands. This is interpreting verse 6's vision of the man flying on the mountain and validates that verses 6 and 36 are 100% using Daniel 2's uncut stone language. Something to drill down on is the Zion language and discuss where the author is drawing that from. Isaiah 31:4 speaks of the eschaton with the multitude coming against the Lord, yet Yahweh himself will come down to fight for Mount Zion. 31:5 qualifies that Mount Zion is Jerusalem. And just take notice of the flying language of the Lord's arrival. It's the same as the Son of Man as the cloud rider. The other notable Old Testament verses is Zechariah 14:1-4 of the day of the Lord, with Yahweh going to battle against the nations of the world at Jerusalem, with verse 4 saying, "His feet shall stand upon the Mount of Olives." I think the thing to see is how the writer is using all these passages and putting them into the blender, if you will, for his own work and purpose. This is very much like reading John with Revelation. He doesn't directly quote Scripture, but without question, he is using the Old Testament all over in Revelation. And just to remain on this Zion discussion, is the Bible describes Zion, i.e. Jerusalem, in the earthly sense, but also in the heavenly sense, like in Hebrews 12 and in Revelation 21, with the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven. 21:10 adds a great and high mountain language applied to heavenly Jerusalem. Quick note is that most always think of Revelation 21 for New Jerusalem, when in fact the first instance is in Revelation 3:12 with the letter of Philadelphia. This is the first occurrence of New Jerusalem in Revelation. Now, the critic will say, well, those are in the New Testament. Yeah, but slow down there, guy. But in 4th Ezra 7:26, it also speaks of heavenly city coming forth at the eschaton, and 10:54 describes it in heavenly terms as well. You couple that with 13:36 uncut mountain, is that the picture is abundantly clear, consistent, and definitely linked together. This demonstrates a consistent Second Temple Jewish understanding of heavenly Zion between Messianic Jews and non-Messianic Jewish camps. And what really caught my eye was that in both Revelation and 4th Ezra, is that they use the bride language for heavenly Jerusalem. To me, this is really too similar without either one of the authors having used the other's ideas, and did so as a polemic against the other's work. Now, because of the authorship dating debate of both works, is that my speculation that the 4th Ezra author is doing some type of polemic against John's work. Nonetheless, this shows that John isn't making stuff up, as critics might try to say of him or any other New Testament writer. Now, verses 37 and 38 wrap up this interpretation section by saying that the Son of Man will rebuke and destroy the evil nations that attack him and his people without labor, and that the nations will be tormented for doing so. This follows the same things we saw in verses 9 through 11 and 27 through 28, which collectively are tracking off of Psalm 2, seen most clearly in verses 9 and 12, with the sun dashing to pieces the heathen nations for their rebellion. We now somewhat pause or deviate from the Son of Man discussion for 9 verses as the author discusses the 10 lost tribes of northern Israel. Verses 39 through 47. And whereas thou sawest that he gathered another peaceable multitude unto him, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea the king, whom Shalmaneser the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt before, that they might there keep their statutes, which they had never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half to go, and the same region is called Arsareth. And then dwelt they there until the latter time. And now when they shall begin to come, the highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they might go through. Therefore you saw the multitude with peace. But those that be left behind of thy people are they that are found within my borders. Now, starting in verse 39, we see the Son of Man gathers a second peaceable multitude under him. Verse 40 explicitly states that this is northern Israel that was deported under Shalmaneser IV. This final deportation of northern Israel occurred in 722 BC. And if you're a chronology nerd, is that this date you just got to plug into your head. And I'd probably say any Bible student should. These are big historical markers. Another layout here shows the overlay of the kings along with the biblical texts that cover that time frame. 2 Kings 17 is the one that we'll be coming back to shortly here. So, verses 39 through 40 let us know that we are talking about the 10 tribes of northern Israel. At the end of 40, it says that they went into another land, with verse 41 saying that the 10 deported tribes convened and said that they're not going to live among the pagan Gentiles, and that they continued on themselves into a country where mankind has never dwelt before. And there they would keep the law faithfully for once. Northern Israel was just bad the minute that they broke off till their end. And verses 43 through 44, the writer portrays their journey as another Exodus type crossing event. Instead of the Sea of Reeds, yes, I said that right, it's the Euphrates River where, like the Exodus, God provides a pathway through the waters for his people to walk safely through. Verse 45 says the name of this place is Arsareth, and the 10 tribes have been living there ever since, and will be until the Son of Man gathers them unto himself. This is a theme you see in the New Testament as well, with Jesus explicitly referring to himself as the Son of Man and the one ruling them. Going back to the name Arsareth for a moment is because this one is one of the legends that gave rise to the idea of the 10 northern tribes being lost. You've probably heard of theories about the lost tribes being Native American tribes, or other theories connected with the Mormons. The most prominent theory on the origin of the name Arsareth is that the Hebrew words for another land in Deuteronomy 29:28 is Ahar and Eretz. So you get Asareth. You can see how they blend together. If you searched Asareth, is that it's going to take you down a rabbit hole where you're going to see that Christopher Columbus identified America with Asareth. And you can find sites and videos that promote this theory still, that shows how the 10 tribes settled in the Americas. You can see their ships, sailing from Spain over, and how they journeyed up there in the map. Now, Josephus has a remark about Ezra reading the law to the Jews in Babylon, and follows this up by saying the Jews are basically still in exile, as the two tribes, southern tribes, Judah/Benjamin, are stuck under Roman rule, and the other 10 tribes are still beyond the Euphrates, just like Ezra said, our fourth Ezra author said, and are an immense multitude there. But the thing that to grasp here is that he's clearly saying they're not lost. Both fourth Ezra and Josephus said, yeah, they're over there. Not like, today's internet junkies might throw out there that everybody, we don't know. In the New Testament, we have a handful of references to the 12 tribes, and James 1:2 refers to them as scattered abroad, meaning that they're in exile. Collectively, you have all the tribes specifically referred to in the New Testament other than Dan. Anna the prophetess in Luke 2:36 was noted as from the tribe of Asher, which demonstrates that Jews were still tracking their tribal lineage in the first century. If you look at the chart here, you might think, well, Ephraim looks blank. But remember that Joseph encompasses both Manasseh and Ephraim tribally as his two sons. Just go back to Genesis at the end, and you can see how Jacob blessed Joseph, and his two sons would get the tribal land. Now, Revelation 7's 144,000 is where you will see all 12 tribes called out specifically, other than the tribe of Dan not being mentioned, which has just given rise to endless speculation and debate as to why. Now, the easiest way to debunk the whole idea that the 10 tribes were lost, or that they're the American Native Americans in America, and even to show that the fourth Ezra author is clearly in error, is that going right back to the story of the Assyrian deportation, is that in 2 Kings, it tells us where northern Israel got sent to, and by force, not in the matter like 4th Ezra said about self-determining to go into a farther distant unoccupied land. And in their place, after the Assyrians took them out of northern Israel, the king of Assyria repopulated that territory, all those cities, with people from the pagan territories. And this is how you get into the rise of the Samaritans and so forth. The Assyrian Empire did this often because it prevented the deported people, from banding together, we got to go reclaim our land. Well, there's a bunch of people there. Now you got a whole nother war, because people are seeing that as their homeland after, a generation or two goes by. So the takeaway here is that the fourth Ezra author is envisioning, okay, this is the big important piece, is envisioning the 10 northern tribes coming back and joining with the 2 southern tribes to reform the 12-tribe nation of Israel. This is all rooted in the New Covenant language in the Old Testament, most notably from Jeremiah 31:31. You see God telling those in Jerusalem that he is not going to completely abandon the people. But one day he is going to reform the whole 12-tribe nation. Verse 33 talks about God putting his law in their hearts. You see this same language again in Ezekiel 11, with God gathering his people, putting a new spirit in them, a heart of flesh, not of stone, and will be their God. I think most miss Ezekiel 11 on New Covenant language, as Ezekiel 36 is the more famous chapter, especially in Old Testament prophecies. And here too, we see the same things occurring. God gathers his exiled people from the nations. They get a new heart with his spirit being placed within them and will be his people again. There are references to the new covenant in the New Testament, obviously. Hebrews expounds on it the most when comparing the new covenant to the old Mosaic one. So, once again, you see 1st century AD, Second Temple Jews on the same page that when the Son of Man, i.e. the Messiah, comes, is that he is going to initiate and fulfill the new covenant promise by regathering and reconnecting all the tribes of Israel together again. Let's now close out with the final 6 interpreting verses on the Son of Man, starting with verse 48, going through 53. But those that be left behind of thy people are they that are found within my borders. Now when he destroyeth the multitude of the nations that are gathered together, he shall defend his people that remain. And then shall he show them great wonders. Then said I, O Lord that bearest rule, show me this. Wherefore have I seen the Son of Man coming up from the midst of the sea? And the Lord said unto me, Like as thou canst neither seek out nor know the things that are in the deep of the sea, even so can no man upon earth see my Son, or those that be with him, but in the daytime. This is the interpretation of the dream which thou sawest. A question that you might have been asking yourself gets answered here of why did the 4th Ezra author describe the Son of Man coming out of the sea like the beast when Daniel 7 didn't describe him that way? The answer is found in verse 52 with God's reply to saying that knowing the secrets about the Messiah's arrival before time cannot be known, just like a person's ability to know the things that are in the deep of the sea. They're just both unknown. It's a mystery that men cannot do because God has hidden it from them. The author used this type of language before in chapter 4 with God questioning Ezra if he can answer what are the things that dwell in the midst of the sea and other things that are beyond the capability of the ancient man to see and physically reach. So it all deals with the Messiah being kept in heaven until God sends him to earth to deliver his people from the nations, which we know, verses 47 and 48, we're speaking of the 12 tribes, with verse 48 being the 2 southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin, that the Son of Man is said to defend the people against the multitude of nations. On the chart, we are talking about the first part before the peaceful period begins. This provides us with another dot connection between chapters 7, 12, and 13, as verse 50 says, and then shall he show them great wonders. The he would still be the Son of Man doing great wonders, with them being the 2 southern tribes. The great wonders is the dot connector here, as 13:14 said God would show wonders to his people, and back in 7:27 he said his wonders would be on display. 7:27 shows the same sequence of events as 13:49 through 50, and thus is the same context with the people being delivered from the nations, therefore creating another indisputable direct link between chapters 7 and 13, which again demonstrates that the author knows of only one Messiah who is the Son of Man, the Son of David / the Son of God. At verses 51 and 52 reiterate that the Son of Man is God's Son, who will come with thousands of heaven. Popular rabbis and critical scholars will never show you all of the data because it shows way more support that other Second Temple Jews believed in a singular, dying, delivering Messiah, just like the New Testament teaches about Jesus.
Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. And in the meantime, stay salty.